All right, I'm going to go up and say hi while our guest is getting mic'd up. We're starting a little bit late. The airlines sometimes don't cooperate with our big plans, so let me say welcome to all of you. I'm Evan Smith, the CEO of the Texas Tribune. I want to welcome you to Studio 919 here at the Texas Tribune. This is our relatively new event space that we opened a few weeks ago, formally as a gathering spot for the events that we do in Austin. Gives us an opportunity to do more events, also gives us an opportunity to bring more people into the Tribune offices, interact with reporters, get to know the people who are actually out in the world, care about these issues. And so it's a great opportunity for us to have a community hub under the Texas Tribune's name. And so far, it's been a great a chance to bring people in. During the Tribune Festival, of course, this was one of the 12 venues that we used. And we welcomed a lot of people who'd never known much about what we do here or been to a Tribune event before. And we think there's just a lot of opportunity, blue skies ahead in terms of the mission of the Tribune, which is to bring more people in Texas into a regular conversation about the priorities that we all face as a state. And at election time, there's never a better time than to do events like this. These events are free to attend here at the Tribune. We love to do free events all over the state, but those events need to be paid for by somebody, and that somebody in this case is sponsors. I want to acknowledge AT&T, PepsiCo, Walmart, and Southwest Airlines. Although our guest flew on Southwest Airlines and was a little bit late today, we love Southwest Airlines anyway. They are our sponsors of Texas Tribune events here and elsewhere, along with Taco Deli, which provides tacos as the official taco sponsor of our events, and Cafe Aragona provides your coffee. Please give them a hand, acknowledge their support of the Tribune. If you are not a member of the Tribune, we would welcome your membership. Your member dollars go into the big bucket that supports the operations of the Tribune. We will be 9 years in business on November the 3rd. I think you know by now that we do news, data, and events. We care enormously about informing and engaging the public on a range of issues and on politics, and especially at election time. As I said, we love to be in the water doing this stuff. If you are a member of the Texas Tribune, you make it possible for us to do this work. Sarah Glenn would be happy to sign you up as a member. If you're not already a member today, please think about becoming one, and you could always go online at support.texastribune.org and become a member. Let me tell you about a couple things very quickly we have coming up. Next Tuesday, we'll be here with State Representative Travis Clardy, Republican of Nacogdoches, one of 7 declared candidates for Texas Speaker of the House. 2 days later, up the street on the University of Texas campus at the McCombs School of Business, a conversation with Marvin Odom, the former chairman and president of Shell Oil, now the city of Houston's recovery czar. Basically, he's overseeing a year and a little bit more out the city's efforts to rebuild after the hurricane, and has done great work at that. And I'm interested in talking about the intersection of business and politics with him. October 18th, Justin Nelson, Democratic candidate for Attorney General here. October 23rd, Republican candidate Chip Roy in Texas, Congressional District 21. 3 days later, Joseph Kopser, the Democratic candidate in Texas 21, will be here. And then finally, back on the 15th of November, after the election, which seems like a million years from now, we'll have Eric Johnson of Dallas, the one Democrat filed for Texas Speaker of the House. Silence your phones. Use the hashtag TT events if you tweet about today's event. Now it's my pleasure to introduce all the way from Dallas our great guest this morning, Colin Allred, who is the Democratic nominee in the race for U.S. House District 32. In his first run for office, Mr. Allred defeated 6 fellow Democrats in the March primary, faces the 11-term Republican incumbent Congressman Pete Sessions in the November general election. A former professional football player, spent 5 seasons with the Tennessee Titans as a linebacker, which my son, who's a big professional football fan, tells me is the biggest player on the team. You don't seem like the biggest guy in the world, but he is a former special assistant in the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's Office of General Counsel under then Secretary Julián Castro, and he's a former regional director of voter protection for Battleground, Texas. He's also worked as a voting rights litigator at the Perkins Coie law firm in Washington, D.C. Born and raised in North Dallas, he has an undergraduate degree from Baylor University and a law degree from the University of California, Berkeley. Please note, I've invited Congressman Pete Sessions to sit for an interview this fall as well before the election. Here's hoping he says yes. For now, please join me in welcoming Colin Allred. It's good to be with you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for making time. I thought I would begin by doing a dramatic reading of the president's tweet yesterday, if that's okay.
That's fine.
Woke up yesterday morning, here's the president on Twitter. Congressman Pete Sessions of Texas is a true fighter and patriot, highly respected in D.C. by all, always gets what he wants for his district, our country, strong on crime, border, the usual drill. This is Full endorsement, he says. So the election's over.
That's it.
That's it.
That's
Trump's
it.
one tweet and the election's over. Does this stuff worry you when the president comes out and says, I'm going to support the other guy? Is that a good thing for you or a bad thing for you?
It doesn't worry me, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that this is the second time that he has tweeted about Congressman Sessions.
Correct. September 15th was the first time that he tweeted on
and
the
every
same,
time
same deal.
he tweets his full and complete endorsement, which is a bad sentence usually.
Full and complete being synonyms.
Yeah, right.
That's right, yeah. Really seriously, we're going to get into that? I mean, that's it.
Oh, honestly, I mean,
yeah.
you know, but, and this is a district that obviously rejected Trump in the election in 2016, and it's one,
right.
of course, that I grew up in. I don't think that the politics that the president is pushing are the politics of this area,
right.
the community that I'm running in. And so, no, it doesn't worry me.
Yeah.
I think that it's not surprising, though. Pete Sessions has voted with Donald Trump 98% of the time.
Right.
He's been there with him on every single thing that he's tried to do, and he hasn't stood up on some of the things that I think are bad for North Texas.
So the alignment of Pete Sessions and Donald Trump is for you a natural fit, and it's also a feature and not a bug as far as this election goes. You actually responded yesterday to the president's tweet by saying Pete Sessions is counting on Donald Trump. I'm counting on you. You're perfectly happy to have Trump stand with Sessions. You'll stand with the district.
That's fine. I mean, I think that there are a lot of people who don't, even Republicans who don't see their party reflected in the politics of Donald Trump.
Right.
This is an area that, with Laura Bush, tweeting or writing an op-ed opposing the separation of children at the border, and I think that there's a lot of folks in this community who don't see themselves reflected in those values, and so I think it's fine. And like I said, it's not surprising. He's been there for him. They've worked closely together. They've been lockstep together. It's not a huge shock.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, you could look at it, both this tweet and then the first one, the fact that there have been two, and the fact that next week you've got Mike Pence, the vice president, coming into town to campaign for Sessions. They must feel like they need to shore something up.
Right.
Like the cavalry is being sent in.
Well, Paul Ryan was here a couple weeks ago.
Right.
They brought down Rudy Giuliani,
right.
which I'm not sure, how helpful that is.
On behalf of the media, thank you for that.
Right.
Right.
And then of course, as you said, Vice President Pence is coming,
right.
and that they clearly feel like there's something going on there that they need to try and shore up. I think that it's not the right approach for our area. I think we have
right.
local issues that are not national that we should be focusing on. But if that's the approach they want to take, go for it.
You talked about the fact that this district was, Secretary Clinton had won this district in the last election, and that may be one reason why they think they've got to come in with as many people as possible to help Congressman Sessions. I went back and looked at the history of the district. Undeniably, Secretary Clinton did win the district by a couple points when Congressman Sessions was reelected in 2016. But the history of this district recently makes one think that one of two things is going on. Either that was just a complete anomaly, or it's shifted pretty quickly. Sessions was elected in 2004 to this district. He had served in the other district previously. After redistricting, he moved into the district. He beat Martin Frost in 2004 by 10 points. That was actually the closest race he's had.
Yeah.
The margins of victory in the elections he's had since then, 15, 16.5, 28, 19.5, and 26 in 2014, all over Democrats. 2016, the district was seen as so unwinnable by Democrats. Democrats didn't even file a candidate in 2016. And yet that was the year that Secretary Clinton won. McCain won the district pretty easily. Romney won the district pretty easily. Greg Abbott won the district pretty easily in 2014 against Wendy Davis. How do we know that what happened with Secretary Clinton is not simply an anomaly and that come this election, it will snap back?
Well, Evan, as you know, I'm not a politico, so I haven't spent a lot of time doing deep political analysis of this. I know this community, and I know that we haven't had competitive elections. We haven't had credible candidates in a while.
Yeah.
And so it is kind of hard to use past performance. And I would also point out that even what happened in 2016 was organic. There was no campaign on the ground that was driving that turnout, that was trying to turn out. So
right.
That was entirely organic and a rejection of the politics and of division and the politics that Trump was pushing. And of course, we are rapidly changing, like all of Texas. We have a lot of people who are moving to North Texas. We have every day we get more and more diverse, and that's just the story of Texas. And so, I grew up in this district when it was being represented by Martin Frost, who you remember and who was in many ways the leader of the Texas Democratic delegation
right.
until they drew him out of his district. And so there was an effort certainly to draw this district to be uncompetitive. But there have been some internal changes and external changes that I think have adjusted sort of the way we're looking at it now.
Is that why Secretary Clinton won that district by a couple points last time when it had been not even remotely close in previous elections? It is entirely a reflection of the changes of the population, the composition of the district.
Composition has changed. The politics of the moment have changed. Donald Trump was not running as your traditional kind of Bush Republican in that area. And I think a lot of people saw themselves and didn't see their version of the Republican Party reflected in that, decided they would vote for Secretary Clinton, take a chance on something else. And so, yeah, I think it's a combination of several factors.
Trump being at the top of the ticket was a significant factor.
Well, if you look at it, there weren't that many other races in the area. So
I guess my point is, if it had been Rubio, or it had been Romney, or it had been Jeb Bush,
but it wasn't
in that district. But no, my point is, if it had been, you think possibly that the outcome of that race might have been different?
I don't know. I really don't. I think it's possible, of course, but the election of Trump and the campaign that he ran is one that we cannot change.
Right. It was what it was.
And now we're in this situation, and I think a lot of North Texans don't like what they're seeing.
Here we are in the midterm. One of the truisms about midterm elections is the president is not on the ballot. This is a midterm election in which it feels to me like the president is absolutely on the ballot, right? His name may not literally be on the ballot, but it feels like in a lot of places this district is this election, is a referendum on the president.
Well, maybe, yes, but also I think that Congressman Sessions has not done the hard work of staying in touch with his district. It's not necessarily true that everywhere across the state and across the country that where Donald Trump didn't do well, that member of Congress is in a tight race. This is a tight race in part because of what Pete Sessions has not been doing.
So you're running against Sessions, not Trump?
Absolutely, and I think that it's my community. I was born and raised in it, and I don't think that he's been representing the community that I know.
Yeah.
And I think that he has taken it for granted. I think he's been playing kind of this Washington political game. He doesn't come back to the district very often.
Yep.
He's held one town hall this entire session, and he yelled at his constituents, telling them they don't know how to listen.
So out of touch. That's the short answer is you think the congressman is out of touch.
I think he is.
Let's come back to the case against him. Let's talk about the electoral math here. In the 2014 general, the last midterm, only 156,000 people turned out. In the 2016 general presidential year, 229,000 turned out. So a little bit less than 50% more in a presidential year than a midterm year. Midterm election turnout is typically lower. The expectation is that it's going to be higher this time. Does it need to be presidential level turnout for you to be able to win this district?
Well, I think that we always want higher turnout. I'm a voting rights attorney. I believe in higher turnout.
That's your thing, right?
Yeah, and also, Evan, look at the primary.
Yeah.
So we had presidential level turnout in our primary. So 2016 and 2018 turnout levels are very similar on the Democratic side.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal for us, and that wasn't accidental. We intentionally set out to expand the electorate to get more people out to vote.
Highly competitive Democratic primary.
Right, and that's what we've been trying to do this entire summer and this fall. It's not a bug for us. It certainly is a feature. We believe in door-to-door contact, person-to-person, neighbor-to-neighbor, expanding who is talked to.
Yeah.
And as you know, when you don't have those competitive elections, when you don't have people coming to your door and asking you to vote and communicating, turnout can go down because the processes of democracy can get hollowed out a bit. This is really good for all of us. We need to have competitive elections up and down the ballot all over our state.
Right. Three big groups that Democrats are targeting around Texas, frankly around the country: young people, people of color, and women. The assumption is that those three groups together, a coalition of sorts, will ultimately produce higher turnout and help in this election. NBC Wall Street Journal polled different groups during this election season and found that young people and people of color were two of the three least likely to be engaged in this midterm election. So from a voter turnout standpoint, it's a bit of an uphill battle. Let's take each of those groups separately. Your district, I looked up last night, is 53%, at least the last numbers I saw, 53% Anglo, 47% residents of color. Mm-hmm. So you've got about half the district would fall into that group of potential voters of color who you'd want to turn out on the assumption that they would be more likely to support a Democrat. How do you motivate folks who over time have not been motivated? A quarter of your district is Hispanic. We know famously that within the Democratic turnout universe, there's always a desire to see a higher percentage of the eligible to vote Hispanic vote turn out. How do you crack that code this time?
Well, first of all, we're trying to appeal to everybody, regardless of race, age, all those things. I think that there are things that are going on in our district that are affecting all of us that we need to have change, and so we are certainly trying to have a broad-based appeal. Broad. I think that it's certainly true that I have a unique appeal in some of these communities. I can go into any area of our district and say, I know what your life is like. I was raised here in this district by a
This
single
was
mother.
me, right?
Yeah, I went to
person.
the same schools your kids are going to. I know what's going on for North Texas families. I want to be an advocate for you and it's not just something that I've read about or that I've tried to study. I've experienced it. My family is still here in the district, and I want to be a representative and an advocate for you. I'm not sure we've had someone who can make that same pitch in the past, and so certainly I think that we're going to try to make a broad-based appeal to everybody. But I do think that I have a story to tell that is a bit unique and that will allow us to hopefully make some inroads with some folks
and in this case, the
before.
candidate matters in terms of turning out voters of color, perhaps in a higher.
It always matters, and I think I don't believe in non-voters. I believe in voters who haven't been asked to vote. We haven't had people come by and do this. I mean, it's just a very mechanical process of turning out the vote. There's no silver bullet. You can't just have a compelling candidate and a close race that's getting attention in the paper. You have to go door to door, neighbor to neighbor, and knock on the door and say, there's a candidate I want to talk to you about. And by the way, your polling place is down the street. Can we get you to go vote? Right. It's a very mechanical process, and that's where
it's kind of that boring sausage being made. Turn out, get out to vote, ground game. It's all that stuff that we hear about all the time.
That's part of what I think the story of our area, and I think the story of a lot of Texas, is the number of people who've gotten engaged with these campaigns, who've spent their time. Most of them have never been involved in politics before, who volunteer with us, who don't consider themselves to be particularly hardcore Democrats.
Almost first time that they've really decided to step out.
The vast majority, the first time they've ever knocked on a door or made a phone call or had a difficult conversation with a neighbor about politics. And in this moment, they feel like they need to get engaged, and they have. And I'm just incredibly proud of our community.
This is the debate that people like me have with people like you every 2 years in Texas. I say it's a red state, and then the person in your chair says, no, it's not a red state, it's a non-voting state, and I say you're proving my point. Because it's a non-voting state, it's a red state. I'm perfectly willing to stipulate that there are enough Democrats in a district like yours or in the state of Texas to elect Democrats if Democrats voted. That's really the conundrum, isn't it? Because it's a non-voting state, it's a red state.
Yeah, well, I think that's true, but this is a process. It took us a while to get to this level of turnout, and we've had, I'm a voting rights attorney, I've done this work.
This stuff better than anybody.
We've put barriers in people's way to voting, but it's not just that. We also haven't had compelling candidates and elections up and down the ballot in every area, and so when you don't have that, the kind of structures that normally help you turn out the vote, the structures that get people used to voting every 2 years and going out in November, atrophy. And then you go around and you're talking to people like I was in 2014, doing voting rights work and registering voters, and they don't even know there's an election coming up. You know, and so that's not the case right now. In part because you can't escape our politics at the moment, even if you want to. You open your phone, it's in there. Certainly, if you read the paper, there's just no getting away from it now. And so it has an upside and a downside. And I think the upside certainly is that there are more people engaged than ever have been.
Given your history as a voting rights litigator and as somebody who understands the intricacies of these issues, do you buy the argument that the state of Texas is actively suppressing the vote, or is it more passive suppression? I wonder all the time about online voter registration, motor voter, the kinds of things that other states that have higher voter turnout and voter registration have in place that we do not. We talk about wanting to motivate civic participation, and then we seem to do the exact opposite of what legislatively we say we want. But that's more passive. So do you see some aspect of that here?
You actively don't expand the access to the franchise, and you actively pass laws that make it harder to vote. And then you can passively let those laws take place and do what they do. And so our voter ID law that I was combating in 2014 was extremely harmful in those communities that we're talking about, those kind of expansion areas where I'd go register voters at my high school, at Hillcrest High School, who would have a student ID with a picture on it, with their name on it, issued by a government entity, couldn't vote with that. And a lot of those kids don't need a driver's license. They're not driving. And so, so they were effectively disenfranchised. There was a policy choice that was made there to put that in place, even though.
So you believe that's keeping potentially Democratic turnout, but turnout generally?
I don't see it as a part. Like it's not specifically. It's not just keeping Democrats. There are certainly Republicans who are affected by it. It's not good for our democracy. When we have 33 or 34% turnout like we did in 2014, that's bad for our democracy. That's bad for either party. It produces extremes in the candidates because then they only have to worry about their next primary. And that's not good for any of us. And so. But the biggest thing, I think, is voter registration, as you alluded to. We should have, certainly, online voter registration, and I feel like in past sessions we've come close and had some movement on that where it seemed like it might happen.
Yeah.
There are 40 states that have it.
Right. The argument is always that the mechanism for registering people online is not secure.
Well, there are 40 states that disagree. So.
Right, yeah. We're Texas. We can do anything. Don't let don't California my Texas. That's the thing. We don't want them to be better than us. One way that ground game happens and that voter turnout happens is you spend money.
Yes.
In order to enable that to happen. You've been good at raising money, as other Democrats in certain congressional districts have in this election. You raised $1 million in Q2. You outraised your opponent in Q2, the incumbent, longtime incumbent, which is not nothing. He had more money on hand at the end of Q2 than you did. You just finished raising in Q3. You know that I'm going to ask you to tell me how much you raised.
Right.
You're not going to tell me.
Well, I honestly don't know exactly how much. That's part of it. That's part of it. And
come on.
And listen. What for us?
You're a detail guy. You know this.
Well, but it is true that we have snail mail coming in right now. So we're certainly.
Did you raise more in the third quarter than in the second quarter?
We raised more.
Did you raise more than $2 million?
Possibly.
Possibly.
Yeah, we raised a lot. We have a lot of momentum. We had a lot of people who got engaged in our campaign.
You think you outraised the congressman?
I don't know. I have no.
We don't know what he did.
I have zero insight into that.
When will you release the number?
We'll release it when we have to for our federal filing deadline, which I think is the 15th.
Couple weeks from now.
Yeah.
Does that much money get you what you need? I mean, let's assume you raised in the vicinity of $2 million. Does that get you what you need for the next 33 days between now and Election Day?
Well, we have to continue to raise and continue to do all the things that we've been doing. And, the money for us is important, as we talked about, because there's a lot of education that has to go on here. Yeah. When you haven't had a campaign in an area for a while, you do have to educate the voters about not only the election, but about the candidates, about the issues.
He's been in office for a long time. He's well known.
Well, yes.
You probably have some name ID that you need to build up.
I would say that his record is not well known, though. Right. I talk to people all the time who aren't aware of his votes and kind of the how out of step he is with the district. Wherever you want to parse the district, he certainly has been a pretty far right on the hardcore right of the Congress. And that's certainly not where the district is. And I think there's a lot of people who don't understand that because they haven't had a campaign who's been bringing that to the fore.
So the money that you raise, whatever the amount is, you will put to the test or the task of educating the community on Congressman Sessions' position.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's multiple parts to it. They have to make sure they know who I am and what my story is, and that I have deep roots in the district. And what I want to do for the district, and how that contrasts with what has been going on.
So you will do ads that contrast.
We have, and certainly that's part of it.
When I interviewed Senator O'Rourke, or Congressman O'Rourke, in the Senate race,
a little bit of a slip there.
We'll just edit that out in post, as they say. When Congressman O'Rourke and I sat down over the weekend at the Tribune Festival, I asked him about his ad strategy, which was largely inspirational. He is not doing ads that mention Senator Cruz necessarily. I mean, the thing he just did, the straight to Facebook thing he did mention Senator Cruz. But the TV ads are all basically inspiration. They're just all about him.
Yeah.
You are going to come at.
Well, listen, we're not going to be doing these black and white ads that you see that they're running against me right now, saying that I'm Nancy Pelosi's best friend or anything like that. Yeah. But maybe the O'Rourke campaign feels like Senator Cruz's record is well known. I want people to know that Congressman Sessions tries to pass a resolution yesterday saying calling for protection for pre-existing conditions, but has voted over 50 times to repeal the ACA with no plan to replace those protections for pre-existing conditions. I think they should know that when we have 330,000 people in the district whose health insurance would be affected by that.
Correct.
I think they should know what he's not doing on their side and what the interests are that's driving him maybe not doing that. But fundamentally, I think the most important thing that people need to know is what my story, what I stand for, what I want to do, where I want to take us, how I believe we can do it together, and how I think that our community deserves better representation.
And that's where the money that you bring in is ultimately going to go to do exactly what you just said.
Yeah, although certainly I think the most effective thing in our campaign and with all the technology we have and all the resources that we're able to deploy in this modern era, still the fundamental aspects of campaigning are the same. Person to person, neighbor to neighbor, Texan to Texan. I think it's the most effective thing.
How much of the turnout in this district and the ultimate outcome of this race will be determined by things not in a district? In other words, it is said, that if Congressman O'Rourke's campaign for the Senate is successful at turning out a lot of people, that ultimately he will have coattails that will help you guys. Are you counting on the O'Rourke campaign doing some of your work for you? Are you counting on a Trump collapse at the national level that would ultimately depress Republican turnout? How much of this is stuff outside of your district and outside of your control that you need for this ultimately to work out?
Well, it's interesting. When I got into running for office, I thought that my legal career would be the much more applicable aspect of my background. But my football career in many ways has been, because in football, and especially in training camp for someone like me who was always in the bubble, you had to block out the things that you can't control and focus on what you can.
Right.
We can't control what the president does in Washington. We can't control, really what's happening.
By the way, neither could we.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Persistent condition these days.
Yeah. Right. And it's we have no idea how these things, the impacts of the final weeks are going to impact our election. I think that our work is going to be independent of what's going on with the O'Rourke campaign, but also working with it because we have the same goal, which is to increase turnout to get more people out to vote. And I think that it's nothing but a positive for us, the enthusiasm that he's generating.
At the end of the day, you just have to worry about your own thing.
But we're focused on our own thing, and that's been how we've approached this from the very beginning. This is not I don't think this is a nationally driven race. Even I think that we have some local issues that haven't been taken care of. That's what we've been trying to stay focused on, and stay focused on my local roots. And so the national things will always impact it. But I do think that in the final analysis that there are going to be things that we have done or haven't done locally that determine this election.
I mean, the fact is that there are also going to be things that we're not sitting here today thinking are going to be factors in this race probably in the next 33 days. I mean, a month ago, who would have imagined on the flip side of this that Kavanaugh would be a factor in some congressional and Senate races? I had a Republican consultant last night say to me, I was talking to him about your race, somebody in Texas, and this was what the Republican consultant texted me. Pollsters and campaigners are feeling better about the GOP in the last week. Slumbering Republicans have woken up as the Kavanaugh story has turned into American Horror Story. This idea that somehow that now the Kavanaugh hearings and the ultimate outcome of the Kavanaugh confirmation may motivate Republicans who've been mostly not engaged to suddenly come back and be engaged. I mean, that's something that we couldn't have counted on, like I said, just a couple weeks ago. Have to see what happens. Are you seeing are you hearing much about Kavanaugh in your district?
And it's, I would make the flip side argument that there are people who are even more passionate about making sure that we restore some checks and balances, that we have some level of accountability. And so there may be folks on the other side who are motivated. There are certainly folks on our side who are motivated by it, and I think that we won't know until this is over the way that it impacted it.
Right. So back to Congressman Sessions. The case against him, the elevator pitch to somebody in your district against him, you've said he's out of touch, and you've said that he is at the far right of Congress on specific issues.
Yes.
It's as simple as that.
Well, I think it's that for over 20 years, he's grown out of touch with this district, that he's no longer keeping his focus on what we need here. He doesn't come back and do the constituent work and do the hard work of staying in touch with his district. And he doesn't have the respect for his constituents to talk to him about it. And he casts votes that are out of step with our values and that don't reflect our needs.
Do his policy positions really seem out of step to you with the district? I mean, I went back and I looked at the New York Times Upshot poll that they just did, just as one example. And I saw that while the race is close, according to that poll, a majority, a little bit more than a majority, 53% of the district, one issue, supported the tax cut bill that Congressman Sessions voted for. I mean, this is not an Austin district. This is not a liberal district. This is a district that is kind of center, or maybe a little bit center-right in its politics, if you go down the list of issues. Is he really out of touch with the district, or is
Absolutely.
it? Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that if you want to talk about certainly the tax bill, there's one aspect of the tax bill that you can talk about, but then you have to talk about the impacts of it and whether or not we're going to have to make deep cuts to Social Security and Medicare or add $1.9 trillion to the deficit. Those are very unpopular things, and so you have to tie it to the consequences of what it's going to create and what it's going to cause, the decisions it's going to force us to make.
Right.
And on healthcare, we have the highest uninsured rate in the country, of course. We have 20% of people in Dallas County who don't have health insurance.
Right.
We have 330,000 people in the district who have a pre-existing condition. And then Congressman Sessions goes and votes to repeal the ACA with no plan to replace it, no plan to protect those people with pre-existing conditions.
But he says he's for pre-existing, for
Well, it doesn't matter what he says. I honestly don't care what politicians say. I care what they do. Yeah,
right.
And 50 plus votes is a record enough for me of where your values are on that.
Yeah.
And that's fine if you want to try and put something out at the last second, right before an election, calling for protections for pre-existing conditions, writing a really not even strongly worded letter saying, I stand for pre-existing conditions. But where's the policy behind that? How are you going to enforce that? Because there is a law in place that does it, and you've voted to repeal it over 50 times.
Yeah. Do you think that Congressman, to the degree that President Trump is a factor in this race, that you can successfully tie the existential aspect of the Trump presidency to Sessions? This is what you told the Dallas Morning News editorial board as they've reported it when you met with the editorial board recently. This is, to me, the most dangerous aspect of the presidency. It's not the policies, it's the degradation of our values. You're making a more existential argument about this president, that somehow what is not reflected in this presidency is the values of this country that you believe we stand for as a country and as a community.
The policies are extremely harmful.
Yeah.
But policies can be reversed, and so the tax cut is going to force us to make very deep cuts to critical programs, or we're going to just pass on a huge deficit to our children. The constant attacks and undermining of the ACA have already raised premiums for middle-class families, and as you know, the ACA supplements folks who are below a certain income level.
Indeed.
So it's not affecting them; it only affects the middle class.
Right.
And so those policies hurt, but we can reverse those. I think what a lot of us are concerned about is the undermining of the idea of a free press or of an independent judiciary, or the idea that the criminal justice system in our country shouldn't be used as a political tool to attack your enemies. Every time he calls for going after so-and-so and looking into so-and-so's emails or whatever it might be, that's a little chipping away at the fundamental values that have got us here. And that's not something that is consistent across past Republican presidencies. We've never seen this before, and we need to be on guard for it. And it's not the I'm not running against Donald Trump, I'm running for our community. But certainly we also all have to stand up for those fundamental values, because if we don't, we may pass on a different country than the one that we want to our kids.
You said in an ad, Mr. Allred, that you put up not long ago, I want to be an independent voice, not a party line politician.
Yeah.
I heard that and I thought to myself, well, that's a pretty good thing to say, and to be in a district that is basically 50-50 or close to 50-50 as the polls show. But I want to test that theory, because I thought, well, that's a good line. So I went to your website and I looked at all your issues, and it's like meat and potatoes Democratic policy positions. I don't think that I saw.
Come on. No,
but I'm gonna ask you to correct. I'm gonna ask you to correct me.
Sure.
I went looking for anything on your issues page that suggested to me not a party line politician. Not that there's anything wrong with having those positions. If you want to have those positions, that's fine. But you're advertising yourself as somebody who's not a party line guy. Tell me one thing where you and the Democrats disagree from an issue standpoint.
Well, first of all, not being a party line politician means that I'm not going to just cast a vote because the party wants me to cast it that way.
Peace.
And that we will look at every issue independently. How does it affect my district? How does that, what's the impact going to be? And I'll make an independent decision. My kind of role model is kind of the way I see doing it would be how Mark Vesey has represented his district. I think he's been an excellent representative. He's somebody who has broken from the party on things like the pipeline, on trade. I think those are
and gets hell for it from Democrats.
And gets hell for, and those are positions that I think I agree with. I think that if it's good for your district, you should make those decisions. And listen, I'm not thrilled with everything the Democratic Party is doing.
Right.
And I don't think anybody should be. We can't be complacent with where we are. We don't have any of the levers of power for a reason, and we've been hollowed out here in Texas also for a reason. And so it's not like I'm running as a just put a true blue Democrat on every single thing, right? But I am a proud Democrat. I'm not running from that, but I want to make independent choices. And so,
but
for
of course,
example,
isn't this the argument that Mr. Allred, the Democrats always make about Republicans? Well, Sessions says he's independent, but then he just goes and votes for Trump all the time.
Yeah, that's a great one. Let me give you a good example of that. So in our editorial board meeting with the Dallas Morning News, Pete Sessions said that that Donald Trump is doing the right thing on the tariffs and the trade war he'd initiated with China. But that he opposed the tariffs and the trade war he initiated with China, but he was doing the right thing, but he opposed it. And he's just twisting himself into pretzel, the mental gymnastics that you have to do when you're not willing to just say, hey, listen, this is not good for my area. Even though it's my party's position, even though it's the president of my party's position, our community is suffering.
I break with it. I represent this district. This is bad for us.
The Dallas Morning News had an article a few weeks ago that said we lost 3,500 manufacturing jobs in July because of the trade war. And TI is in the district, and it's going to be deeply impacted by some of these tariffs. And all the congressman with all of his years of experience and position can do is send a letter that's signed onto by other members of the Texas delegation saying, please don't do this. But then won't defend and won't do anything else, won't take any other affirmative steps. When he could halt all legislation if he wanted to, and say, I'm not letting anything out of the Rules Committee until you take care of my area. We won't do that. That's being a party line politician. And that to me is a mistake. We got to get away from that.
So tell me again, Mr. Allred, give me a position that you disagree with the Democratic Party on.
Well, I just mentioned trade earlier, and I think that for us in Texas, we have done extremely well from trade. We've been a big beneficiary of it. There are things about trade and about free trade that have had negative impacts that we need to try and address. But we have to do it in a context where we understand the economic overall benefit that it has for our area. So to the extent that you have like a Bernie Sanders or others in the party who are anti-trade or against
and who say they're taking up the cause of labor in opposing some of those trade deals, you think no trade is a positive thing?
For us, it is, and you can't. I'm not running to represent the entire country or the entire anything. It's for my district.
Your district,
it is
specifically,
and that's evidenced on I-35 every single day.
Right.
And so for us, it's something we need to be expanding. The trade war that Trump has initiated and that Sessions has supported has been harmful, and NAFTA has been a benefit for us, and we should be expanding our markets, not reducing them.
Let me ask you a different version of this. This, again, something I was trying to get Congressman O'Rourke to talk about on Saturday night. Is being associated with the National Democratic Party a liability in Texas? You alluded to the fact that, well, you said right out that Congressman Sessions is trying to turn you into Colin Pelosi.
Yeah.
Right? This is what they do.
Yeah. Right?
They'll associate you with Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer. They'll say he's just a puppet of the National Democratic Party. Is that a liability for you? Is the National Democratic Party a liability for you?
I wouldn't put it that way. I'm not here to throw rocks from the outside. I want to reform it from the inside, and that's part of why I'm running, is to give us new leadership, a fresh approach. We need that both for our country and for our party. And so the problems that I have with it, I think we can be addressed by getting more people engaged, getting a new generation engaged. We should be expanding our outreach to, as you mentioned earlier, minority communities, younger communities, areas where we have this ability to do that. We should be having candidates who appeal to them, and that's part of what I'm trying to do in this campaign. It's part of what we've done. But I don't think that it's a liability, so to speak. I just think that there are things that I would change, and that's part of why I got engaged in this.
This debate going on now in the primaries between the progressive wing of the party, the so-called Ocasio-Cortez and Ayanna Pressley wing of the party against the establishment Democrats, is that a healthy thing for the party, that debate?
Well, I think that there's been way too much, in my opinion, weight given to individual races in which maybe that candidate was a better reflection of that district than their opponent, and then it's said, okay, well, that's now the Democratic Party. I think that Ocasio-Cortez in New York was probably a better fit for her district than Crowley was at that point of his life and at the point of his career, and so she won. I mean, Crowley was also for a lot of the positions she was for. It wasn't exactly an ideological battle.
But these are all, the point is, these are all individual, 435 individual races.
I think so.
In the case of the House, no larger meaning should be taken.
You're a student of these things. All politics is local, and it depends on local issues. So.
Right. Let me ask you about some issues. You came out on January the 18th, probably not just on January the 18th, but I noticed the tweet on January the 18th. You came out for Medicare for All.
Yeah, for a version of it, yeah.
Well, here's what the tweet said. Tweet didn't have the word version in it. Tweet said, I believe in Medicare for all, period. Unmodified.
Yeah.
January the 18th.
And we have a position on our website at the same time that explains exactly what that means.
Lizzie, and Twitter can sometimes be shorthand, stipulated. Lizzie Fletcher, who is your Democratic counterpart in the Houston district against Culberson, not for this. MJ Hager, not for this.
Well, when you say this, let's talk about
Well, let's talk about Medicare. Well, but Medicare for all is a thing.
Well, now it's become, I think, there's been an effort to associate it with only one thing, and it's been used as a shorthand for many things.
Well, let's just do this. Define what it is that you're for.
It's a Medicare buy-in. I think everybody should have access to it, and I think everybody should have a chance to have access to a low-cost, government-provided healthcare option that will compete with private insurers, that will create, hopefully, a virtuous cycle of competition that will lower costs for all of us.
Right.
And I think that that's a smart thing to do. And usually, what I've always said is I don't care if we call it Medicare Part X, Medicare, Part E, with E being for everyone. I really don't care what we call it, and that's less important to me than it is that we expand coverage, expand options, and lower costs.
Why is that better than single payer?
Well, single payer is a totally different thing, and as you know, the countries that have that also control the doctors, the hospitals, so they also control all the cost mechanisms in addition to the care. We don't control those mechanisms, so we can't have that version in this country. We will have to have some other version of expanding coverage. Now, let's stipulate this too, though. we pay more than the rest of the world for less coverage, for less results.
Famously.
And so there's clearly things that aren't working, and it's largely because of Washington and politicians and the power of some of the industries that are involved in this, that we haven't gotten some smart, common sense things done, like a Medicare buy-in option, like allowing Medicare to negotiate the cost of drug prices. Medicare buys 1/3 of all prescription drugs. If it were negotiating drug prices, it would lower costs for everyone.
Right.
And there's, the Medicaid does that, the VA does that.
Right.
The only reason Medicare doesn't is because of lobbyists.
Should we have expanded Medicare when the opportunity came up? Medicaid expansion?
Absolutely. We are paying into it as Texans. We're sending money right now to other states, and we're not getting anything
We're basically a donor state.
We're a donor state on this issue, and it's boneheaded politics. It's not putting people first. I forget the exact number, but around 1 million Texans are not covered because of our failure to expand Medicaid. And let's also talk about how fiscally irresponsible it is. In Dallas County, we spend a lot of time talking about property taxes. And part of that is driven by the cost of people having uncompensated care at our county hospitals.
Passed along to everybody.
Yeah. And Dallas County is also a magnet. We get people from the counties surrounding our county who don't have health insurance are sent to our county
hospitals, right?
Because it's a trauma center, and so that cost is passed on to us in the forms of property taxes, and so it's fiscally irresponsible. It's the wrong thing to do, and it's not working.
Another attack line against Democrats this cycle has been about immigrations and customs enforcement. Do you want to abolish ICE? Do you think that we should consider abolishing ICE? Again, your district is about a quarter Hispanic.
Yeah.
It's a big issue in your district as it is every place else.
No, I think that it doesn't make any sense to me, partly because there will be some mechanism and some government agency that will carry this out. Right. What we need to have is oversight and policy positions and comprehensive reform.
Yeah.
So any agency, and I worked at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, I worked in the Department of Justice, any agency requires oversight from Congress. They are given that power through congressional appropriations and things like that. You have to oversee what they're doing and make sure that it's consistent with our values and with the law. But really, the immigration system, as we know, is just stuck in the mud, and it's so broken. And it's really broken because of Washington. People, I think, have reached a general consensus that we need to do something. The only people who can't come to that consensus are the folks who are representing us in D.C.
So this is a federal issue. The problem is a federal problem, and the blame is federal blame.
It is, because the federal government needs to step into this arena and establish, through a comprehensive reform, all the things that we're going to be doing, take it out of the piecemeal approach that it has right now, where different states are doing different things, where sometimes you can have real abuses happening that shouldn't have to happen, and also that's hurting our economy and it's not moving us forward. So this is interesting that we've had bipartisan agreements on a comprehensive reform before, whether it's Ted Kennedy and George W. Bush coming together, or the more recent version of the Gang of Eight that got out of the Senate with over 60 votes and included John McCain, I think Marco Rubio, who you mentioned, and each time the House and the hardliners in the House, including my opponent, Pete Sessions, have stopped it from happening. And then they want to use that as a campaign issue and say, oh, well, MS-13 is coming to us and all these things.
So if it's a federal issue and there's federal responsibility for it, when leaders in Texas over the last number of years complained that the federal government was not doing its job on border security, and that's why Texas had to appropriate $800 million in each of the last 2-year budget cycles, they're saying basically Obama did not do, and the Obama administration did not do what it needed to do to secure the border. It sounds like you agree.
Well, no, I don't agree with that. It's because it requires legislation. The administration can only do so much. So I wouldn't say that it's Obama.
You put it on Congress.
Yeah, because the administration can only do what's consistent with the law. And in fact, where President Obama tried to do other things, like through the for Dreamers and deferred action for childhood arrivals. In those cases, they say, oh, it's a huge overstep of boundaries and it's an unconstitutional action, but we're not going to do anything. We're not going to vote for the DREAM Act. We're not going to try to get anything actually done. We just want to throw rocks.
So then the problem is
the Congress. The problem is Congress. Absolutely, and it's the partisanship. It's the inability to work across lines, even when there are common sense things that are bipartisan agreements that have been reached. And when you allow the polls of either party to control the narrative and control legislation, which this Congress has certainly allowed the poll of the Republican Party to do that, then you produce a do-nothing Congress.
Would you be a vote to overturn the tax cut proposal? We talked about that earlier, the fact that according to the Upshot poll, 53% of the people in your district support the tax cuts. You have an issue with the consequences, you said, of those tax
Yeah, and
cuts.
I think,
would you vote to overturn?
Certainly parts of it, certainly. And, there are parts of it that I think are good. We needed to cut taxes for the middle class, but that tax cut is not permanent. That's temporary. The tax cut for corporations is permanent. We needed to.
So you would eliminate. You would go back and undo the tax cut for corporations.
We're going to have to undo parts of this because we will not have the ability to invest in the infrastructure that we need.
Yeah.
I think the next bill out of the next Congress should be the first bill of the next Congress should be an infrastructure bill. Donald Trump has said he wanted to do a $1 trillion infrastructure bill.
Every week is infrastructure week.
Every week is
remember.
infrastructure week, and we have 100,000 people a year moving from out of state to North Texas. We're growing extremely rapidly. 1 out of every 10 babies born in the country is born in Texas. Our growth is not going anywhere. We need that infrastructure bill.
Yeah.
We can't do that when we are making these what I think are irresponsible decisions about fiscal policy.
So at least portions of the tax cut you would vote to overturn. Yeah. Let me ask you about your 5 years in the NFL and your experience in professional football. A lot of people talk about what NFL players should be doing. I'm sitting across from an actual NFL player. A lot of people talk about the criminal justice system's effect on African-American men. I happen to be sitting across from an African-American man. Your position on kneeling. You wrote almost a year ago to the day as we sit here in U.S. News, police brutality, institutional racism, and a different set of rules for different groups of people based simply on the color of their skin is what is behind the protests of NFL players. Mm-hmm. So you believe that the NFL players who have kneeled have done so properly and appropriately?
Well, what I believe is that we can disagree, and it's healthy to disagree within our democracy about someone's protest. That's the whole point of protest, is that not everyone's going to agree with it. Otherwise, there'd be no need to do it.
Right.
And I think that's healthy. It's normal for us to have back and forth about this in our democracy. What's not healthy and what is counterproductive and what's un-American, I think, is to say that they don't have the right to do that. And so, the idea that the president or any other government official can pick what kind of free speech is acceptable and what isn't.
Well, they say that the people who kneel are demeaning the flag, that they're not patriotic, that they're somehow disrespecting the military. You know the arguments.
When there's nothing in our Constitution, and I don't think they're doing that, there's nothing in our Constitution that says that they get to decide that.
They meaning the president or anybody else who objects.
There's no arbiter of what's patriotism. There's no arbiter of what is respectful, of the country. And thankfully, that's the case.
Yeah.
Because there are things that we look back on now with and value and hold up as examples of great American heroism, from the 60s and 50s and movements in the 70s for women's equality that we look back on now fondly, that were not so popular at the time, but that were important and that moved our country forward. Our story as a country, to me, is one of forward progress.
Yep.
We have moved an incredible distance in a short period of time, and I think that's what the rest of the world respects about us. Not that we are perfect, but that we address our imperfections. And so part of that is the idea of using whatever platform you have to try and call attention to whatever your issue is. And so I think this is what these players are trying to do. And if you listen to their interviews, what they're talking about, they're trying to do it in a respectful manner. They've tried to do it in a way that they think is consistent with their values. It's not violent. It's a peaceful approach. Yep. And I think that's very harmful when you have government officials using this as a political stunt to try and drive their base turnout or try to drive some kind of divisiveness.
What about the NFL owners who have said we're going to somehow sanction players who don't stand for the anthem or, I mean, you know that it's migrated down from the level of government objecting to a point where it's...
Well, not all the owners have done that, and some have. And I think that the NFL owners...
One up in your community, in fact, has...
Yeah, and there's a lot of owners in the NFL who I think are, I would not agree with on many things.
Right.
And I don't think they're a very representative group of the country. And what they're trying to do is get the most money out of their product as possible. As players, we see ourselves as human beings. We have other concerns. And I was part of the labor battles with the NFL ownership, trying to get better health care, trying to get better benefits for players, trying to get them to admit what they already knew about some of the dangers involved with playing, but they didn't tell us about it. And so, I think that there's many aspects of NFL ownership that I wouldn't hold up as exactly...
If you were an active player today, Mr. Allred, would you be kneeling?
I don't think it's a very useful question.
I love that question. I asked it.
Yeah, well,
I don't
think
it's a hugely useful question.
Yeah, I appreciate you, and I think you're great, but I think I don't think it's very useful because I have gone to law school since then. I've served in the Obama administration since then. I've been, done all these other things, and so I have a very different perspective than I would have had when I was 23 or 24. Certainly, I wouldn't now.
Certainly you would not now.
No, and I don't. But that doesn't mean that I disagree with what they're doing or that I think that they're wrong. But they're young men who are using what they think is their only platform and what their voice is. I had the option. I knew I was going to go to law school afterwards. I knew I was going to be a civil rights lawyer. I had other things that I was going to be doing and able to do. And I don't begrudge anyone using whatever their platform is to do what they feel strongly is right. Now, we can disagree about whether or not you think it is. That's fine. That's healthy. But it's
whether or not you would do it, you have no beef with them doing it.
Yeah.
That's the point. The issue that they're objecting to, institutional racism, police brutality, and all that, is a legitimate issue in need of discussion in this country.
Absolutely.
I'm interested in your perspective, what you see in your community. I remember having a conversation with Ron Kirk, the former mayor of Dallas, African American,
friend of mine,
about, of all things, ride hailing several years ago, and he said, the thing I love about ride hailing is. I was the mayor of Dallas. I'm a corporate attorney, and I can't get a cab because I'm African American. I have a problem getting a cab. The thing I like about ride-hailing is that ride-hailing solves that problem.
Right.
He was talking about the problems of being Ron Kirk and not being able to get a cab as an emblem of the problem that we still have dealing with some of this stuff. I mean, you have these issues at the granular level and at the larger level.
Yeah.
I want you to talk to me about your view of race and the police. And do you believe that we have a law enforcement problem in this country? Congressman O'Rourke is getting slapped around for having suggested that institutional racism within law enforcement is like a new Jim Crow. Police groups have come out, his opponent has come out and attacked him for daring to say that.
Yeah.
You give me your perspective.
I can only speak, I think, effectively to the Dallas Police Force, which I think has done an excellent job. And if you look at when we had the unfortunate, or horrible tragedy in which those officers were ambushed and shot.
July 7th.
They were protecting, a protest, and they were taking pictures and they were posing, and there was all these great images coming out of it of how well they were doing and making sure that it was a peaceful protest, that everything was going smoothly. The community was.
People forget about what preceded that, right? There were, police.
And then, of course, the story became, and it was rightfully so, about the ambush on these officers who were trying to serve and protect. And I think the Dallas Police Force has made great reforms and moved in the right direction. But we have to recognize as a country the disparities that are in our system. And some of them are beyond what any one police force can be held accountable for or even attributed to. And those come from institutional barriers and things that are in place for decades, and policies that have been in place for decades, and some that initially had support even from the communities that are affected by them, but that have turned out to have a negative effect and maybe have gone certainly too far. And so I'm less concerned with looking backwards and much more concerned with looking forward. And what can we do going forward to continue the progress that we've made to improve our relations between minority communities and the police that are protecting and serving them. And there are a lot of things that go into that. And a lot of it does start with Congress, but there are things that are at the state and local level too. But we have to have people of goodwill who are willing to talk about it, who are willing to engage in the conversation, who at least will admit the existence of it. And then we can have a debate about what's the best way to address it.
Yeah. Do you worry that police groups hear everything you just said and they think, well, he just hates cops?
I don't think it is.
No, I'm not suggesting that you said that. But the reality is, this is a subject that is full of nuance, as discussed by people of full hearts and good intentions. And yet, when you come out the other end of it, there are people who say, yeah, that's all fancy talk. At the end of the day, he just hates the cops.
Well, I worked in a prosecutor's office where we worked closely with the police and with the FBI to put people away who are breaking the law. I think that we put far too much on the plate of our police. We ask them to deal with mental illness. We ask them to deal with societal things that go far beyond anything they could police in an evening or in a week or in a year or in a decade. We ask them to address issues of lack of opportunity that are outside of the scope of what they could ever address. And I think they're doing an excellent job under very difficult circumstances. Okay. What we need to do is improve the circumstances.
Let me ask you two quick annoying questions before we open it up to the audience. Because I know you don't want to be asked these questions, but I got to ask because I do think they're relevant. You have been cool to the idea of saying whether you would support Nancy Pelosi as Speaker.
Yeah.
Even if you don't want to answer my question, the fact is that as you yourself say the Sessions campaign and Republicans are trying to tie you directly to Speaker Pelosi. One way to untie yourself would be to say point blank, I am not supportive of Speaker Pelosi in that leadership position, as other Democratic congressional candidates have done.
Yeah.
Clarify for us your position on this issue.
Well, my position has been very consistent from the very beginning, which is I'm going to take a look at who's running and make a decision based on who I think is best for my community and for the country at that time. I don't know who else is running, and I think I do compare it to 2020. I think that it's kind of like asking who will you support in that election.
Not knowing yet who's running.
We don't know what the options are, we don't know what their policies are going to be, and we have a very important election in the meantime that will critically impact either way. And let me also say this. Congressman Sessions or the other groups on that side are not going to dictate who I vote for, and they wouldn't let us dictate who they vote for either. And I think that it's kind of like thing where we're going to try and box you in and use this as some kind of a hammer against you. But that's absolutely not. I'm going to make a decision independently, and I'm going to do that in other issues as well.
Right.
And I think this is part of having the spine to actually get involved in this and to represent an area. If I think there's someone better for our area, I certainly will vote for them.
So you're not ruling out voting for it, but you're not ruling it in.
No, and if Joaquin wants to run for it, then we can talk about that. So
right. You're proposing Joaquin for Speaker? Okay, well that's good. That's a little news. The other thing that is said about Democrats in your position across the country by Republicans is, well, if you elect Colin Allred, then that means the Democrats will move to impeaching the president. Is that on your mind? Should that be something that people in your district are concerned about, that if they elect you, first thing you all are going to do is try to impeach the president?
No. I mean, for over a year and a half now, I've been going around talking about all the things we want to do, and none of them have been, and the secret plan here is to impeach the president.
So you don't believe that the House should impeach the president?
I don't think that this is the time to talk about it. I think that we have an investigation that is ongoing that needs to be allowed to reach its rightful and justful conclusion.
And at that point?
There has to be a decision reached, because there needs to be a recommendation made under the special counsel laws, regulations. A recommendation needs to be issued about what happened, and that needs to be addressed. And there's a constitutional duty involved here. If there's a high crime or misdemeanor, that's a separate conversation, though. I think it would be extremely harmful for the country to rush into this willy-nilly without reaching the end of this. I think there was an impulse to try and undo what people feel like was an unjust result in the election, but that what we really need to do is learn the lessons of that election, internalize them, and win the next one, and then win the next one, and have conversations with people that are compelling and that talk about their issues and that matter what's going on in their life. I have been blown away from the very beginning of this campaign how little I've spoken about Donald Trump with folks in my district.
Yep.
I think that there's a lot of reasons for that. I think that part of it is that they don't need to have a lot of conversations about it because you can't escape it. It's in the news so much every day. But also, I think that there's a deep hunger and a desire for people to cut through the noise and talk about what's going on in their lives, to return to what this whole representative democracy idea and getting back to that, especially in a time when maybe people feel a little bit uneasy and anxious about what's going on with the president and with what's going on in that administration. So maybe it's a return to basics. I don't know. But that's what I think we need to get to.
Good. Let's now what we need to get to is questions. Let's take a couple from our audience, and then we'll let everybody get on their way. We start a little bit late. We're going to end a little bit late, but we'll get out of here pretty soon. Sir.
Hi, I'm Mike Lewis. I'm an activist here in Austin, and I have a question about, actually a question and a comment. The question is about climate change. In order for the U.S. to hit its Paris Agreement targets of 100% renewable by 2035, a lot of those cuts to emissions have to be front-loaded, and that's why you're looking at the most popular bill right now on climate change is H.R. 3671, the Off Fossil Fuels Act. We just had our first Democrat Congresswoman in Texas co-sponsor it, Representative Eddie Bernice Johnson. And so my question is about climate change. What actions are you going to take to make sure that we hit those Paris targets? The comment is that you said you modeled your campaign off of Representative Mark Vesey. He actually became a co-sponsor of H.R. 676, which is Medicare for All, and just wanted to point that out, that I think he sees some merit in it. So thank you.
Yeah. Well,
what about climate?
Yeah, so here's where I am on climate. I certainly accept the scientific reality that our climate is changing, that it's caused by human activity, and that we need to do something about it. What I do believe also is that we are an energy state and will remain one. And so how do we balance these two? Well, I think that it is by making smart investments in renewable energies and continuing what actually our major oil companies are already doing here. Shell and Exxon and some of these others are investing heavily in wind power and in solar, and now wind is our second highest source of energy here in Texas. And as you know, we have the highest wind capacity in the country. Right. I watch TV at night and I see a commercial come on in Dallas for TXU Energy. It says, solar days and free nights. And you could get your solar power during the day and your wind power at night because our wind is blowing so much. And I think that the market has created that situation. But what we are going to need to do now is try and invest in that in a way that it can now expand and get to utility scale delivery of solar and wind power. I think this is the next generation of this. We certainly have the unlimited solar capacity. We need to be investing in research for the battery capacity to store it and to deliver it in an efficient way. And I think that there's no one I talk to who wouldn't prefer to be having a panel on their roof that they've been selling back to the energy company, their own energy power. And we're not that far off from having photovoltaic cells in our paint. Then you can just paint on something that can be convert solar into power. And the rest of the world is moving very quickly on this, and the Chinese are investing heavily in this, and we should be as well. And we want to lead that next wave.
You think it was a mistake for us to withdraw from the Paris?
Absolutely, undoubtedly, huge mistake, and also not just a mistake for the climate, for our business. And you notice that all of the major oil companies in Texas recommended not pulling out of the Paris Accord, right. Because they were willing to comply with those things. They were already moving in that direction, and also because we send the message out to the rest of the world: hey, if you're an entrepreneur who wants to start a green tech energy company, Texas and America is not where you want to do it. And you saw France and Canada and other countries encouraging our scientists and our entrepreneurs to come to their country to do the work that we won't do here. And that's a big mistake for us. We should be leading this next wave, and Texas should be at the forefront. So.
Any questions else here? Sir, ma'am, and then in the front. Sorry, pardon me, sir, and then right there. Yes.
Mr. Allred, I have just two policy questions. First, do you support the new USMCA trade deal? And my second question is, what would you do to limit the potential impact of proposed changes just recently, I think this past weekend, to the public charge provision in the immigration process?
I'm not really familiar with the second thing you're referring to. The new, I don't know what he's calling it now, the U.S.-Mexico...
U.S.-Mexico-Canada, USMCA. This is the replacement for tweak of NAFTA.
Right, so this is really the initial stage of this, and now it's still going to have to go through ratification of the U.S. Congress, of the Mexican and Canadian legislatures. I think there are some positive things in it, and I don't have a problem saying that. It's not just against everything just because Trump is doing it. Whether it's increased wage hours and environmental standards, or making it easier to organize, those are positives. But what we have to be always aware of is making sure that we're not driving up costs and making it harder for consumers. And that's where the protectionism and the tariffs, to me, are such a big issue. And because it's going to hurt not only our businesses, but the consumers on the receiving end of it. And so these trade wars and this move towards protectionism, to me, in a world that is increasingly shrinking and getting smaller, is exactly the wrong approach. What we should be doing is forming smart trade agreements with the rest of the world that allow us to expand our reach, but also to get, to make sure that our businesses are moving forward and having all of those things. So to me, I'm not just against it from the outset. I want to see more about it. I think I've read some kind of bullet points on it, but I don't know the full reach of it. There seems to be some positives in it. And I will say this, I don't think we should be going around bullying and arguing with our closest allies. And for Texas, by far, our largest trading partner is Mexico.
It's Mexico, right.
And the relationship has been so frayed by this administration's actions, whether you're talking about forcing them to build a wall, or these negotiations, which we're not always so positive, right? And so we need to be maintaining those positive relationships. Protectionism and a move towards trying to build a wall, not literally but figuratively, around our country, are only going to, I think, diminish our position in world leadership, and we need to be avoiding that.
Take one more right there. Sir? No? Okay, yes. Last one.
An awful lot of the predictions for the Democrats taking over the House based on the enthusiasm obviously reflected in the Democratic campaigns, as well as some results in special elections. A poll done for and released by NPR and other media outlets as of last night and this morning shows a drastic narrowing of the enthusiasm about Democrats versus Republicans.
Right.
At one point, Democrats seem to have had, several days ago, a 12% margin and more enthusiasm about, obviously, the midterm elections. And that's now a 2-point difference. Are you seeing that in your district? And specifically, you and Evan had mentioned earlier the importance in your district of the voters of color and young voters, but you didn't mention what seems to have been critical in Hillary's campaign. Pardon me, she's a friend of some 40 years, but her campaign in obviously 2016 had to benefit from a high enthusiasm and turnout of female voters. Are you seeing the narrowing of the enthusiasm on the part of Democrats? And particularly, how does that affect the female vote, which, because of Kavanaugh and Trump and other issues, are going to be very critical?
What do you see?
Yeah, well, for us, the women in my district have been leading the kind of return and restoration of our democracy from the very beginning of this process. I work with probably a dozen groups that didn't exist before the election and that were formed on election night or in the weeks thereafter, and they're almost entirely led by women who are not traditionally, folks who you would think would be leading a Democratic-leaning organization, although they're not always Democratic. They are sometimes a small d Democratic. And so that enthusiasm is not going away, and I think it's just going to intensify on our side. And again, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, we can't control many things, and we can't control whatever enthusiasm they might be having on that side. I know that we're trying to appeal to a lot of people, and that we have a lot of people engaged in our campaign that are helping us do that. And that is not going anywhere. In fact, it's just been ramping up, and I think it's going to continue.
Good. Mr. Allred, thank you for being such a good sport, coming down and being with us today. We appreciate you. Thanks, everybody, for coming. We'll see you again.
Thanks, Evan.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Good luck with the rest of the campaign.
Thank you so much.